So the definition of the word stuck is actually caught or held in a position so you cannot move. And we get stuck all the time. We get stuck in rush hour traffic. We get stuck in dresses, in dressing rooms. We get stuck with the check. We get stuck with crazy roommates. We get stuck at lame parties. We get stuck in commitments that we wish we had never made. We get stuck in bad relationships and bad habits. We get stuck in fashion trends that should have never trended. We get stuck on airplanes next to people with nasty body odor and obnoxious cackles and incessant bladder problems, right? We get stuck on blind dates with creepy people who drool and want to make out. We just get stuck all the time. And a few years ago, when my kids were younger, I have a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old, but they were much younger, and it was a rainy summer day. And I live in Bellingham, Washington. If you've ever been there, it's awesome, and you need to come visit me. But when it's rainy in the summer, I was had this sort of drive in me that I had to get them to a place that provided an activity. Otherwise, I was going to go find some street-sold Ritalin or put them in solitary confinement. And so I took them to this place called the Fun Zone. And the Fun Zone is kind of like all these bouncy houses everywhere, and then there's all these tables that parents can sit and drink coffee and surf the web and talk to their friends while kids just jump like crazy. And so I met a girlfriend there, and we chatted, had coffee, and our kids were all playing, and then we decided it was time to go. And so I went to the bathroom because I needed to go to the bathroom real quick before we left. And so I come back, and I go up to these bouncy houses, and I yell, "Aiden, Bella, it's time to go, let's go." And I don't hear anything, right? So I'm yelling to them again. And you have to understand, as a mom, it is so hard to get kids out of a place that's fun. It's almost harder than getting your grandma to run a marathon, right? So I'm like yelling, "Bella, Aiden, we gotta go." And I hear them say, "One more time down, Mom, Kay." And so I say, "Okay, that's fine." And they're like, "Watch me." And I'm like, "Okay, I'll watch you." So I'm standing here, right? And this whole time I'm waiting and I'm yelling. And back here are all the parents, right? And they're all, doing what they're doing. And so I'm waiting. And it was then that I feel this tap on my shoulder. And I sort of turn around and I deduce in seconds, because I'm really, really smart, that the woman worked for this place because she had a Fun Zone t-shirt. And I'm still waiting for my obedient children to come off of the bouncy houses, right? And this chick says, "Ma'am?" And I learned a long time ago that when people say ma'am, something is wrong, okay? So I sort of turn around to her, and she says, "Ma'am, your skirt is stuck inside your underwear." And she pauses, and it hit me. Oh my gosh, this is my worst nightmare, right? Like, my knee-length skirt is stuck inside my underwear, and it's showing all my goods to all these people. There's a lot of dads out there, and by goods, I mean my bads. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the least likely thing that I ever want to happen. And they call this place the Fun Zone. So she says, "Ma'am," and I'm just like frozen, and then I bust out in this hysterical laughter because it was either that or cry, and I turn around and I just hug her because I didn't know what to do, and I'm hugging her, and I'm like pulling out my skirt out of my underwear. But let me tell you, skirts are not meant to be stuck inside of underwear. It's just no way to live. And you and I, we get stuck in different ways. We get stuck in addiction. And we get stuck in bad relationships and a lack of options and feelings of powerlessness. We get stuck desiring to change a situation that feels like it's never going to change. Or we've prayed a million prayers and we don't feel like our prayers are being answered. We get stuck in negative thought patterns. and bitter feelings that we can't seem to escape, and sad attempts at self-sabotage. We get stuck giving up on our dreams and no longer believing that God can do something amazing through us. We get stuck in these sort of shallow habits of relating with certain people in our lives. We get stuck angry at the church. We get stuck in all these different ways. And sometimes we know we're stuck. And we desperately desire to want to get unstuck. And sometimes we don't even know that we are. When I think about people who are stuck, I think about this girl that I had coffee with last year. And by this strange turn of events, I got a phone call because this young woman's mother's employer, this big corporation actually, someone called me from the HR and asked me to meet with this girl. It was kind of random. I don't know the girl. I don't know the mother. But I got the call, and I said, sure. So I go into this coffee shop, and I have no idea what she looks like, right? So I'm that girl all the time that has to walk into coffee shops and be like, hey, are you Sheila? Hey, are you Jill? You know, and everyone's like, oh, this chick's desperate. And dating the ladies. So I'm walking around, and I finally find my blind date, and she's about the cutest thing that you've ever seen. And I sit down with her, and she begins to share her story. And her story goes that a few weeks prior, her dad died. And since the time that her dad passed away, she has not returned back to work. She has not returned back to her husband. In fact, she's considering now leaving her husband, and she has not returned back to her children. If I were to try to describe to you what this young woman looked like, it was like she was paralyzed by grief. And as she began to tell me her story of what that looked like, I began to start to understand. She said that her dad had been an alcoholic his entire life, and that her whole life she would try to help him to get back on his feet, and her husband would let him come and live with them when he needed help. And so just recently they had let him come and live with them, and they had a young kid. And so they let him come, and he stayed there for a while, and one particular day he calls her, and he says, hey, I'm thinking about going back to my apartment tonight, and I was wondering if you could look for my keys. I can't find my keys. She said, no, I'm not going to look for your keys. And as she tells me this story, I get it, right? I can hear the frustration, because you get like that even in your love and your kindness towards someone. You just feel frustrated. You don't want to enable anymore, and you don't want to cover up their problem, and you just want to say, you know what, take some responsibility for yourself and find your own keys. She was playing with her kid at the time, so she said, no, I'm not going to look for your keys. And then she said, I killed my dad. I killed my dad. I'm in a coffee shop. I don't know this lady. I said, what do you mean? What do you mean you killed your dad? She said, my dad went out drinking that night. He didn't have keys to get into his place, so he walked up the back steps. He tripped on the stairs and fell to his death. I killed my dad. She said, the next day I saw his keys were right there on the counter. I could have given him his keys, but I told him to look for his keys himself. And now where is he? She just agonized. Where is this man of faith who's had this addiction? And now where is he? I've killed him. And she's sitting there, and she's stuck in self-torture and blame. And she can't even return back to her own children and her husband and her job. If you were stuck, wouldn't you want to know it? If you know you're stuck, wouldn't you wouldn't you want to know how to get unstuck? Sometimes in life, I think we just really need someone to tap us on the shoulder and let us know that our skirt is stuck inside of our underwear. And we're going to look at a collision today in the Bible. That's what I call them, where Jesus runs into someone. And it's out of John chapter 5. And if you brought a Bible or you have it on your phone, you're going to want to use it, because the slides apparently don't show up this morning. And I'm sorry about that. But I have a feeling that this collision is going to help you and I and our loved ones in the places where we find ourselves stuck. Only in John chapter 5, it's not a skirt and it's not underwear. So the story starts out that Jesus shows up at a pool party, right? And it's by a sheep gate, right? So there's sheep, right? Bah, and people are apparently hanging out, but there's no beach balls or Mai Tais or bikinis as you might expect. There's sick people. The Bible says, here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, and the paralyzed. So here people are without hope, people who've given up, people who are desperate, and they're lying there, and Jesus walks into this sick people pool party. And the place was called Bethesda, which means house of mercy. Interestingly enough, the word in Hebrew and Aramaic can also mean shame or disgrace. So the place that they're even at has this double-sided meaning. And it makes sense. This place is promising hope or a chance or healing, and so the broken and sick are lining up like, Bieber's Beliebers waiting for a backstage pass. And for hundreds of years, people have read this story in the Bible, and they've kind of wondered if this place is legit. And in 1888, it was actually excavated in Jerusalem, and they found it. And it's interesting because if you look in your Bible, some of you will have verse 4, and some of you will not have verse 4 in your Bible. And they believe that it was actually added by a scribe who was familiar with the tradition of healing at Bethesda to try to explain what's actually going on here. And so verse 4 says, they waited for the moving of the waters. From time to time, an angel of the Lord would come down and stir up the waters. The first one into the pool after each such disturbance would be cured of whatever disease he had. This superstitious belief is not actually biblically encouraged. It's more a local tradition that people clung to. And most likely, Jewish religious leaders would have had huge issues with this belief. And I get that on many levels. I have huge issues with this belief because it seems like a cruel joke. It seems like the survival of healing the fittest, right? Because it's like, there's this pool where the pro athletes are being healed for their runny noses. Meanwhile, people with gout and leprosy are writhing in pain. It's this place that really promises that the healthy person is the one who will most likely get well. What a limited offer of healing. But look who's about to stir up the waters with a drive-by healing. The Bible says there was an invalid there who'd been an invalid for 38 years. He'd been lying there longer than some of us have been alive. And ancient stories of healing often mentioned the years a person was sick so as to put this exclamation point on the awesome amazingness of the healer. I just made up that word. And we're about to see some awesome amazingness because Jesus sees him lying there, and the Bible says he learns that he had been in this condition for a long time, and he says to the man, do you want to get well? The word learned here doesn't mean that Jesus, just got the 411, the information from someone else. It actually means that he could see into this divine situation with his divine omniscience and knowledge. This is the same crazy ability that he had when he saw Philip under the fig tree, only Jesus was nowhere to be seen when he speaks of Philip under a fig tree. It's the same crazy ability he had when he met the woman at the well in John chapter 4, and he told her everything she had ever done. See, God can see into the hearts and minds of people, and he clearly sees what we don't in this text. And that starts to unravel as we go. We begin to realize there's more going on with this guy than just being physically sick. The word want, when Jesus says, do you want to get well? It is the word philo, and it means to not only will something, but also to press on into action. When you philo, you want more than just to get well, you purpose getting well. Jesus asks this piercing question. that asks a whole lot more questions. When I hear that question, I hear other questions like, if you want to get well, are you acting like it? If you want to get well, Willow, why are you always focused on being sick? If you want to get well, why are you being so unhealthy? Try sitting down and allowing Jesus to ask you that question. It will pierce all of us in different spaces and places in our lives that aren't fully whole. The man responds, "Sir, I have no one to help me get in the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Notice this guy doesn't actually answer Jesus' question. He asked, "Do you want to get well?" And the man doesn't answer the question. What is going on here? Learned helplessness. It's a conditioned behavior in which an individual gives up trying to escape a painful situation after repeatedly failing to escape. This man doesn't philo to get well. He's given up trying. You can hear how defeated he is. He's thrown in the towel. You can hear his assumption to fail. This guy is so stuck. And like him, we also get stuck. Not just in big ways, in small ways too. And half of getting unstuck is recognizing why we're there. And so I have a list. It's not an all-inclusive list, but as I've thought about it, here are some ways that we get stuck. And I'm hoping this morning these will be helpful to you as you hear them out of your own place of being stuck, but also out of the place that your loved ones and the people you care about are being stuck, and you're walking alongside and caring for them and ministering to them. So here they are. We get stuck, hyper-focused on the one thing that will make us better. This guy in the story, he could only see the one thing that he believed would make his life better, and that was what? The stirring water. There were no other options. You know you do this if you find yourself saying things like, "My only way out is," or "If blank doesn't happen or does happen, then I'm good, or then I'm out of luck," or "If I get this one thing," right? The trouble with this kind of thinking is that we're so focused on the one thing that we miss the one thing. When we do this, we limit what we can do and what God can do to help get us unstuck. We also get stuck thinking there is nothing I can do. This guy was constantly thinking about everything he couldn't do rather than anything that he could. This is what started all the problems in the first place. Remember Adam and Eve, right? In the garden, they're given this sweet place to frolic and play, a paradise, and they were looking at everything they couldn't do, which was only one thing. It was one tree. And rather than look at everything they could do, they were focused on this one tree. We can't partake of this one tree. Looking at what we can do rather than what we can't do keeps our lives out of the rut. But instead, we think about all the ways that we're powerless and we have no control. I know I do this. Do you? We get stuck in the past. We make choices based on what we experience, so our past starts to determine our present. We haven't had success, so we won't have success. It never works out, so it will never work out. I've been hurt, so I'll always be hurt. This is learned helplessness to the nth degree when we let our past determine our present. We get stuck blaming others. It's everyone else's fault. I'm still doing this. It's their fault for being losers. They were no-shows. What choice do I have but to sit here and be disappointed by the people in my life? A lot of times it gets easier to blame others than to blame who really holds responsibility. I'm going to keep going down this list, but I'm going to stop for a minute. And I'm going to remind us that it's never fun when someone says, "Ma'am, your skirt is stuck inside your underwear." This isn't a fun list to self-evaluate. But it's very important that we allow ourselves to be brave and ask ourselves if these are the places we're in. We get stuck in our own negativity. We can't stop thinking about all the ways life sucks, how everything is going wrong and nothing is going right. Nobody likes me. Everybody hates me. I think I'll go eat some worms. We get stuck comparing, and that lands us in these major pity parties. We feel so sorry for ourselves. We never get what everyone else gets. This guy could have totally done that, is doing that. We always lose out and get the short end of the stick. We have bad luck, and so we get stuck listening to emo music and journaling about how sorry and pitiful our lives are compared to other people at the sick pool party. That's funny, but we do it, right? And we get stuck in someday. Someday I will try hard. Someday I will quit. Someday I will get better. Someday I will live. Like this guy thought. We get stuck in the impossible. We get stuck not seeing past our current circumstance. We high center on what is rather than what could be. And we get stuck believing this is my life. Nothing will ever change. This guy could only see the impossibilities rather than the possibilities. And how often are we like that? We get stuck spiritually, thinking God won't do anything about that because he hasn't yet. What good is he? Where has he been? We get stuck saying, I'll try all these options first, and if they all fail, then I'll turn to God. We get stuck saying, you aren't for me, Jesus. I can't let you in because you'll change everything. And lastly, we get stuck needing help and never asking for it. This guy needed help. Instead, he had been waiting for 38 years, and instead of utilizing the help that was standing right in front of him, what did he do? He just chose to complain. This list, if you want to access it, it's up on my website, wecollide.net. If it's helpful to you, there's thoughts on there too that you can go and access it. But it's not an all-inclusive list. It's just a few ideas to get your heart and your mind stirred so that the Spirit can get in there and help you recognize in your own life where you might be stuck. And it's one thing to get stuck in an elevator for a few minutes, right? Or with a horrible professor for a quarter, but it's another thing to get stuck and stay there because of our own doing. And that's where many of us sometimes find ourselves. There are these psychological studies on our brain, and they've been conducted to sort of actually try to explain to us why we often get stuck. As humans, we experience pain, and we experience stress. And our brain reacts with this automatic response called fight, flight, or freeze. Maybe you've heard of it before. It's almost this God-given instructional skill instilled in our brains that tells us to fight when there's a deadly fire, or when Goliath shows up at our door threatening our children. The survival instinct can be good if a bear is chasing you in a forest and you need to back away slowly. This survival instinct can be good if you're in a school and a shooter comes in and you need to do something to protect people. A clear picture of this response is in Schindler's List. The girl with the red coat. She walks almost like she is frozen, weaving her way through the gunfire, the chaos, the mass destruction, and the massacre. Let's go, please. Come on. She walks through all of this only to arrive at her living quarters where she is clearly alone. She's been orphaned, and everything around her is in chaos. Her neighbors are dead. Her friends are missing. Her parents are nowhere to be found, and she climbs underneath the bed and hides. We, like her, fight, flight, and freeze. Sometimes because we have to, sometimes because it's all we know. Sometimes because it's just this automatic gut response inside of us to protect ourselves from what we fear might happen, even if it won't. But what about this girl years later? What about this girl when the war is over and the Berlin Wall has been torn down and racial reconciliation has begun to happen? What about her when she is safe and back with her family? What about her as a 40-year-old woman decades later still hiding underneath her bed? That might sound ridiculous, yet it's often how we get stuck. We get stuck because we experienced or are experiencing something painful or stressful, and we want to protect ourselves. I know what this is like. As I remember someone knocking on my door one ordinary day, someone who hurt me deeply. And I took my baby and I ran upstairs and I hid in a closet as a 38-year-old woman who could only think to hide because I was still afraid of getting hurt. Yet this person was no longer hurting me. And most of us, we're not running from tigers, and we don't often face, raging fires that are going to kill us, but we have been hurt and we have been stressed. And when we feel like there's a risk of that happening again, we go into this mental place of survival, and that's where we get stuck. And over time, we stop taking risks in big ways and small ways. And the thing about God is, what's so beautiful about Jesus is that he knows that. He knows how you've been hurt and how I've been hurt. And so he actually shows up in those spaces where we're stuck because he desires to get us unstuck. And in order to see change in our lives, we have to walk out of hiding. We have to stop running. We have to quit fighting and take risks, and risk always requires faith. A wounded girl has to come out from underneath the bed. She has to walk out of her closet with her baby. She has to return from the deep grief and go back to her husband and back to her child and back to her job. This guy in the Bible was mostly stuck because he was just trying to survive, and Jesus knew that. And so he runs into this guy's life and he says, "Do you want to get well?" And he does the same for you and I. So look at what Jesus says. He says, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." I can hear this guy thinking, did you get the memo, Jesus? I'm like the guy that doesn't move. Hello, invalid. Pick up something and go somewhere. I don't do that. Jesus is letting him know you will have to take a risk to get well. Do you guys hear that? You will have to take a risk to get well. This man hadn't moved in a lifetime, and in order to see change, he was going to have to move. And his survival brain, our survival brain, says things like, "No, don't do that. That is a bad idea. This could end in pain. This could go down really badly. You could fail. You could trip. You could fumble. Just you stay here. Here is safe. Here's what you know. Don't go to rehab. Don't confess. Don't ask for help. Don't start dreaming. Don't follow the doctor's orders. No. Just you stay right here. But Jesus desires us to get unstuck. And getting unstuck requires risk, which requires faith. And it's like Jesus says to this guy, risk because you know that I am right here with you as you walk towards health. Jesus invites us all to take part in our own health and life. Do you hear that? He doesn't just ask us to pray and wait for miracles. He actually asks us to be involved in our own health and healing. This man was being asked to move, and it's like Jesus says, no, not someday, no, right now. Yes, you've experienced things not going your way, but don't let that continue to inform you of what could be. What could be is right now, and then Jesus heals this guy. Jesus did for this guy what he hoped the stirring waters would do for him over a course of decades in an unexpected instant. At once, the Bible says the man was cured. He picked up his mat and he walked. It's interesting to me to wonder how much of the healing that needs to take place in our lives, not all of it, but how much of the healing that does, how much of it would become a reality if we would just say yes to Jesus' invitation to move. Some say this man had no faith. I will argue he had great faith. He risked hoping. He risked leaving what he knew. He risked finding a new identity outside of who he had been. And he risked trusting in Jesus. Isaiah 35, 1-6 proclaims that one day there would be one who would come and make everything better. That he would be called the Messiah. And Isaiah 35 describes what he would look like when he came. And this is what it says. The desert and the parched land will be glad. The wilderness will rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it will burst into bloom. It will rejoice greatly and shout for joy. The glory of Lebanon will be given to it, the splendor of Carmel and Sharon. They will see the glory of the Lord, the splendor of our God. Strengthen the feeble hands. Steady the knees that give way. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong, do not fear. Your God will come. He will come with vengeance, with divine retribution. He will come to save you. Then will the eyes of the blind be opened and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then will the lame leap like deer and the mute tongue shout for joy. As this lame man got up and leaped like a deer, perhaps this sick people pool party all realized who had just shown up for a swim. It was the Messiah. It was the God that they had been waiting for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and boom, he collided on this scene, and without words, Jesus was telling the world, I am the one thing you have been waiting for. The Bible says in John 5, the day on which this took place was the Sabbath, and so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, it's the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat. Lame. God commanded people to rest, right? He wanted them to chill. That's how he made our bodies. And the religious people, they took this to a completely different level. And the next thing you know, you couldn't even go to the bathroom on the Sabbath. I totally made that one up. But they did get super psycho about it. And you couldn't even carry a burden or firewood or do anything that hinted of work or caused perspiration. The religious people took this so far, right? You couldn't carry a kitty or push your bike or carry groceries, or you would be made into man pesto. Like literally, they would stone you. And so this guy who just got use of his legs again, and he's finally freed and should be getting jiggy with it, and their response is that he's in big trouble. And what does he say? The man who made me well said to me, pick up your mat and walk. Notice this guy. He's actually still making excuses and blaming other people, good or bad, for his circumstances. He's not taking any personal responsibility or ownership for what he'd like to see or not see in his life. He could have said, yeah, you're right, it is the Sabbath, but guess what? I haven't walked in 38 years, and now look at me. But he doesn't say that. And the religious guys ask him, who told you to do this? Well, this guy has no clue because Jesus slipped out trying to dodge a bullet. But then what happens? Jesus goes and seeks him out because he's not done with this guy. He wants more for him than just physical healing. And so Jesus says to him, see, you are well again. Stop sinning or something worse may happen to you. Now this seems a little harsh. When I read this the first time, I was like, wow, why you gotta be like quenching the party, Jesus? But this isn't a cause and effect statement. Let me try to explain what's going on here. Jesus isn't threatening something bad to happen to this guy if he continues sinning. Jesus clearly speaks about this in John chapter 9 in a completely different collision when he was straight up asked if a blind man was blind because of his sin. And Jesus made it clear that his particular disease was not due to sin in John chapter 9. But here in this particular person's life, Jesus is suggesting that this guy is the cause of his own issues. Now, it is obvious we can't put a blank statement for other people or ourselves on this because it's Jesus' job to personally answer those questions on an individual basis because not all issues are self-imposed. But in this case, this guy is stuck because he's keeping himself there. And Jesus sees this guy already slipping backwards. And it's so easy for us to slip backwards, isn't it? And it's like Jesus taps him on the shoulder and says, man, your skirt is stuck in your underwear. Why would Jesus do that? Why? Because he doesn't want us to be a hamster on a hamster wheel. Jesus would show up to us because he wants our hope to be bigger than our hopelessness. He wants us to believe that he can do the impossible in what seems impossible. He wants us to stop blaming and start taking personal responsibility and being a partner in our own health and our own life. God would do this because he wants us to walk out of our ruts instead of sit in them. I asked the girl at the coffee shop if she'd been trying to rescue her dad her whole life. I said, I know what that's like. It was no mistake that God had her randomly meeting with me. I said, have you tried to rescue him your whole life? She said, yeah. She talked about how much she loved her dad. How she'd always dreamt that he would get better. How he would try and then he'd fall off the wagon and she'd come into the rescue and try to help him and cover up for him. And she saw his gentle and his caring side and he kept messing up and trying and disappointing. And this was actually the brokenness that would cause her parents' divorce and the distance in their family. And here she was as a married adult mother still trying to rescue her dad. And now her dad was as far away as she's ever experienced. And she was agonizing about where he was and if he was with God or if he was in hell. And she's sitting in this coffee shop just struggling because she had convinced herself that she's a killer. Because if she blamed herself, then she wouldn't have to blame her dad. And so she's stuck in this self-torture and this poor theology and this sense that she doesn't feel like she deserves her family anymore. What would you say to her? I prayed. I didn't know what to say. but I sensed God's Spirit say, I want to get this girl unstuck. And so I just began asking her, can you believe by faith that God is the giver of life and death, that he is sovereign over life and death? Can you believe that by faith? Yeah, she said. Okay, well, if you can believe that, can you believe Psalm 139 where it says that God ordained all the days of your life, that he determines when you are born and when you are dead? Can you believe that? Yes, okay, yeah, she said. Okay, then can you believe that God, when he says who he is, he says that he loves you and he doesn't want anything to be between you and him? Do you believe that? She said, yeah, I do believe that. This girl doesn't go to church, but she's heard about God. She says, I believe that. I said, have you heard the message of the cross? Can you believe by faith that the cross is God's ultimate way to show you that he loves you and he will do anything for you so that nothing will separate you from the love of God? Can you believe that by faith? She said, yes. I said, if you can believe that, can you by faith believe in the power of the resurrection, that God is actually greater than death? And she said, yes. I said, then what about this? Could you by faith believe that God also wanted to rescue your father? And that he would do anything he could to rescue him? And could you by chance believe by faith that this perhaps was the ultimate rescue of your father? And that he is now in a perfect place where there is no more addiction. There's no more pain. There's no more need to numb your pain. There's no more guilt. Could you believe that he's ultimately been rescued? She's crying. Can you believe it's God's job to rescue your dad and it was not your job? This girl walked out of a coffee shop and went back to her husband and to her kid and to her family and ultimately to Jesus. Why? Because for whatever reason, he worked out these crazy chess pieces because he just wanted to get her to a place where she could hear how much she's loved. And he could take the burden off of her that she's been carrying that's been keeping her stuck. Because that's what Jesus does. We have to say yes to God's invitation in our part of getting unstuck. And then we have to allow God to do the rest. And I understand that some of us come in here today and there's places in our lives that feel stuck. And we feel like we have done our part. And we feel like we have prayed and we still feel stuck. That's a different sermon. And this is what I mean by that. If you have, after purposing to get well, after moving when God says to move, after risking when God says to risk, if you are still incapable of moving and you have done all that you can and God still has you there, that's not being stuck. That is being refined, and there is a big difference. When you're being refined, your character is being transformed, your heart is being shaped, your compassion is increasing, and your life is purposed while your circumstances are holding still. When you're stuck, nothing is moving unless it's going backwards. You feel like you're sinking and there's no personal growth in areas of your life, then that's being stuck. And you can come to God and you can ask God in your place what it is that he's calling you to do. And the same Jesus that met this man in John chapter 5 will meet you and I in that place. It's way more difficult to ask God to speak into your life in the places you're stuck than to pray and ask for instant healing, isn't it? Yet what do most of us pray for? Get me out of this place. Do something amazing. Do a miracle, but he wants you to take part in your own health and life. Would this man give Jesus' voice that place in his life? He begins to see just how much Jesus cares about him. And Jesus entering into this guy's life was actually a huge catalyst in getting himself killed. In fact, the message says that really set them off. The Jews were now not only out to expose him, they were out to kill him. In Jesus' omniscience, he knew he wouldn't dodge this bullet. Yet he cared so much about this one man that he was willing to get into a rut so this man could get out of one. The Bible ends the story saying the man went away and told the Jews it was Jesus who made